Hello, everyone, and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. This is episode number 299, and I'm your host, as always, Dr. Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here today. We're just 1 week away from that 300 episode milestone I've been looking forward to, so I'm really excited for that and for an announcement that I'll have to make to you next week. But in this episode, I'll be sharing with you an interview I did with Oceana Sawyer, death doula and grief teacher, on embodied grieving for ancestral trauma and loss. And Oceana and I have such a heartfelt conversation here about the deep grief that all of us are feeling right now as a result of this past year of the COVID pandemic and the racial violence and trauma that has affected our society. And so I hope you enjoy it. I really learned a lot, and I will say, since talking to Oceana, I've really been making a point of feeling my own grief in my body whenever I start to feel irritated or annoyed or even feeling despair and hopelessness. I'm beginning to recognize that as grief and finding where it sits in my body and figuring out how I can move with that, as Oceana recommended. So I found her suggestions very helpful, and Oceana is just wonderful. She is such a goddess of the earth, Mother Earth, and her warmth just comes through to me so powerfully, and her groundedness. And so anyway, I hope you benefit from listening too, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to thank my latest supporter on Patreon, Susanna Brown. Thank you so much for signing up to make a monthly donation to keep the podcast on the air. And thank you to Sandy Jane Stacy for increasing the amount of your pledge each month. I really appreciate all of you who are offering your support. If anyone listening is interested in joining our team, you can go to my page at Patreon, patreon.com/EOLU, and find out all about how you can sign up and be a supporter. I also want to remind you that you'll find show notes for this episode, but also all of the archives, all of the previous 298 episodes at the webpage eolupodcast.com. And there you'll find everything you need to know, all the notes and links for this episode and every other episode. So check out that page, eolupodcast.com, if you're interested in going back and listening to any previous episodes. So now we will move on to my interview with Oceana Sawyer. And as always, stay tuned after the interview. I'll be back with a few takeaways and to say goodbye. So here we go. Today, I'm so happy to be welcoming my guest, Oceana Sawyer. Oceana is a death doula and funeral celebrant who enjoyed a previous career in corporate training and organizational development. She utilizes earth-based spirituality, expressive arts, and integral counseling psychology in her work with clients as she helps them create a conscious dying roadmap. And you can learn more about Oceana and all of the wonderful work she's doing, which we'll be talking about today, at her website, which is Oceana End of Life Doula, all one word, no spaces or punctuation.com. So oceanaendoflifedoula.com. And Oceana, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Karen.
I've really been looking forward to this conversation because we had a little preview conversation last week that got my mind turning, and I can't wait to have more of a discussion with you today. But I was hoping you'd start out just by giving us a sense of your own journey and how you ended up going from the corporate life into becoming an end-of-life doula and doing all this wonderful work you're doing around the end of life.
Such a good question. Let's see. My journey in the end-of-life space began quite unexpectedly. My father announced that he was done. He back in 2007, and he had lived 5 years with high blood. Oh, actually, way longer than that. But in the last 5 to 10 years of his life, he was having several mini strokes from his hypertension. So when his kidneys started to fail and they needed to put him on dialysis, he said, I'm out. I'm just going to party out. And so with this announcement, I'm going to party out, I thought, oh, this is too good to miss. So I was already in the final stages of a spiritual training program. So I thought I will go and be with him in this process and learn something about how a person dies from a spiritual perspective. So I went to Atlanta where he was. I flew from Berkeley to Atlanta to be with him. My brother and his wife came also, and we sat vigil with him. And it was, it's hard to explain but I did a really detailed explanation of this actually a couple of weeks ago in another interview, which I won't do here because it ended up being like the entire hour. But basically, it was a fairly extraordinary experience. One where I really got to track him from consciousness through unconsciousness and then departure from this life on Earth. And it was, as I said, sufficiently compelling that at the conclusion of that, I decided, this is something I could do. This liminal space, this sort of timeless portal that occurs when someone is departing this life, just was enormously fascinating to me. And I found myself, it sort of like awakened aspects of myself that I didn't really know existed. And I saw myself there in that space, a very competent guide. And almost like I had done it before, if you believe in past lives, like, oh, look, this is me doing this work again. I can do this. So it was, I had that experience with him in 2007. There weren't the proliferation of death doula training that there are now. So I was sort of a little bit at loose ends with what to do with that. And I explored a couple different options, and because I had already retired from my corporate job and I was in some kind of happy semi-retirement. But you know how it is with folks like us. You can't be sitting around very long before you're looking for the next thing. So I had a couple other things I did, and then I wound up. I lived at that time in an intentional community with lots of baby boomers. There we go. And we were looking at how are we going to age in place, and it became clear to me that dying was going to be a part of that aging. So I decided to make my role at the end of life, which had been sort of informal, like people, family and friends started calling me, oh, so-and-so's dying. We know you're comfortable here. Can you just show up here, please? So after a lot of doing that, I made it more formal a couple of years ago and got some training. And I will say this, though, you don't need a certificate to be an end-of-life doula. And I know you've had people on here who have said that before, but I just want to underscore it. I went and did whatever training I did, and it was good information, especially around the logistics and some legalities and, just getting some more tools under my belt. But this work of tending to people at the end of their lives, this is ancient work. It was not invented by, oh gosh, who's that fellow? Okay, I'm not going to go there. Let's just say it was not invented by the people who are trying to sell you a certification. believe me. This is old work. This is very old work. Many cultures have practices around this work. They still have practices around this work. Many spiritual traditions have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of practice and thought and theory around the end of life. So this is not anything that requires money or certification to do it. But I did that, and I'm glad I did. And now I'm doing what I'm doing, which is basically specializing in grief, because that's what happened in 2020, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
Lots
Very
of
much
people
so.
dying at a pace unprecedented and alone. Many of them. And so what's a death doula to do? You know, I spent, the past year just basically holding space for people in their grief.
I love how you described it, Oceana, as while sitting with your father, it was like an awakening to something that you already knew. And I think the only reason to our society it seems novel to work with death and dying or to be a death doula is simply because we've ignored it for such a long time and haven't even looked at it. And therefore it seems to us like something that's brand new, but I think you're right. This is ancient, an ancient practice and ancient caring for our loved ones.
Yeah, just very much like birth. I know that birth doulas have really gotten traction now. And, I see that the time is coming for death doulas. But all of these major life transitions obviously are things that have been going on for thousands of years. And so here we are. And
it's not like we've invented some better way to do it. It's not like really it's still the same. It's still the same basic process, birth and death, both. So
I love the way you just said that too, is because I sometimes I come across people who are speaking as if they invented some way of being around death, and it's like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, if anything, I feel like what we're doing in this field is trying to remember what it was that actually was useful before it was stripped away from us culturally, like so many things have been in this culture of capitalism, and where everybody gets their culture stripped away, some people more violently than others. And we don't even know how to hardly be human anymore.
Yeah, and I liked reading in your work that you practice in an earth-centered way, but also body-centered, and I think that's another issue in our society. We've lost our connections to the earth, to nature, and even our connections to our own heart and our own physicality. And we tend to intellectualize everything. So we're thinking and talking about grief and trying to make it better in our heads. But I know one of the things that you talk about in practice is embodying grief, and how do we really experience grief with our whole selves? So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. This is probably the central piece, the ground. There we go. The ground of my work right now is how do we return to our bodies, return to ourselves, which there are so many ways to do it. But for me, I can tell you for sure that the fastest way, the most efficient way, is to locate myself again back in my body. And that can be something as simple as just putting my hand on my heart, one hand on my heart, one on my belly, and just feeling, just sort of grounding and feeling, kind of like what I'm doing right now, in what am I feeling? What's actually here? What's real? What's actually happening for me right now? And in the particular context around grief, because our culture is so anti, I want to say anti-life. It's for sure anti-death. But I think these two go hand in hand. This unwillingness to make space for death and grief is also the same mechanism that doesn't really want to make space for us to have a life. And it's funny when I say that word, like that phrase, just like that, because very often people who are really busy in their careers and their businesses, you'll hear them say, "Oh man, I wish I could just get a life," or we'll say about somebody like, "Man, that dude just needs to get a life." So these are phrases that we use, and we use them kind of humorously, sarcastically. But this is what is being stripped from us to be participants in our culture, our capitalistic culture, or grind culture. This is all about you're just a little hamster on a wheel. Go, 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 go. Work, 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 work. Yeah, you get to go home for a few hours and watch some television and consume some things. Maybe you can shop, 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 shop. So you can go to work the next day and work, work, work. So you can shop, shop, shop some more. So this whole wheel that we're on is not life. And so it's not surprising to me that when one of these little hamsters falls off the wheel, we don't even hardly know what to do because our focus is on the wheel, the grind. So death, grief, just kind of returning the focus inward back to the body is almost a revolutionary act. I see so many memes about the revolution of rest, and I don't want to take anything away from the brilliant Tricia Hersey, who the nap bishop who founded the nap ministry. That whole body of work that she's doing there can't even be encapsulated in a mere trope, rest as revolution. But we see this kind of language all over social media, and really what we're talking about is how can we return to our bodies? How can we be embodied? And when I find that, especially if I'm in terms of grief, I can locate my grief in my body, then it counteracts that well-honed mechanism that I have, like so many people, just keep going, keep going. Oh, you don't have to worry about those messy emotions, those emotions that'll get you off track because you're on track and you want to stay on track because you're on the wheel, you're grinding away. All of that is a very disembodied process. So it's very, it's kind of counterintuitive maybe, but it's actually the antidote to being in your head around the grief. If you can turn your focus back to your body, and we are so unaccustomed to be in our body that sometimes we don't even know that we're grieving. We can't even tell because we're not crying, but we're very confused. We can't focus. We can hardly sleep. We don't know why. Well, guess what? That is grief in your body, that all that energy that has not been dealt with. So to turn the focus back inward to the body is a way to begin to metabolize the grief that is there. Who is that? You know this book, Karen. I'm not going to remember the author, but The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that whole thing. The body, you can pretend that you're not connected, that you're all in your head and you're staying focused, but your body has already accounted for this huge emotional experience that you're not paying attention to. And so there's stuff going on in your body, whether you like it or not. And so the opportunity is to use that energy. It might manifest as crying, and crying that you feel like you can never stop crying. Once I go down this crying road, can I ever stop? I don't know. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but who cares? Because that crying is your life, is your love of the person, is your emotional self, is your human self looking to do something with this huge loss. All this energy that was in your life is now not there. But when somebody leaves, you can see this even on the deathbed. You're going to have to break in here anytime, Karen. You're going to get a word in edgewise, because I'm kind of on a roll. But, it's just, death doulas know what happens when someone dies, that those moments right before a person leaves their body for good, as in active dying, the breath becomes more jagged, less predictable. There's longer and longer spaces between inhales, and until there's finally not the next inhale. And there's this sort of space that opens up. I call it like a timeless portal. It's just something very magical and mysterious. Well, there's energy there, because when a person leaves and you go into this timeless portal of between life and death, all of that energy that gets released when they depart, okay, so that's still energy, cannot be destroyed. It can only be moved from one place to the next, okay? That same energy then is or similar energy in your body now that you have gone through this experience with this person, or you've lost this person, or you've lost this job, or you've lost this relationship. That energy that occupied your life is still there. The physical representation of it may not be there, but the energy is still there. And that's energy that you can use to, I like to say, grow yourself up, become more human. And once you go into that place of looking in through your body at all the stuff that's stored there, all the emotions, all the hurt, all the memories, you're probably going to find a lot of stuff there. And I got to say, it's probably a good idea to have a therapist or someone you really trust if you haven't done any kind of self-exploration prior. But grief can be a very useful doorway into self-exploration, I have found.
Yeah. And I know you talked about in one of your blogs, you wrote about after your own mother died, that you used the body to help you move this energy, moves some of the energy of grieving. And I wondered if you'd talk about that, ways that we can, that we can feel the grief in our bodies, and then how to utilize that energy within us.
Yes, everybody has their own way. And it's good to spend the time to find your way. In my grief workshops, Grief Your Way, I did last year, I would simply make people offers based on my experience that you just alluded to. So when my mother died, I felt my fatigue manifested in fatigue, confusion, a real inability to focus. And what I discovered was that the longer that I ignored my body, like I kind of just stayed in my head, or even in my head, like, okay, I guess I should be crying now, or I guess I should be journaling now. I did have a therapist in the early days, and it was good to talk to somebody about my experience, but I got to tell you, that only got me so far. And then what I discovered through doing a sound bath, I just stumbled into doing a sound bath with Shayna Nunley out of Atlanta, because everything was virtual then, so it was so great. And once I kind of like had that experience, I realized I have so many tools that are body based that I could start exploring. So I did breath work, and that was helpful. So much of grief is stored in the lungs. I did not know that. Or maybe I read it and didn't really get it until I had the experience of doing breath work and getting 5 minutes into it, and then just overwhelmed with tears. And these tears from doing this breath work, I have a very specific instance in my mind I'm thinking of. It was because my mother died of lung cancer, smoked too long. And this breathing then, it was like a reminder, like, oh yes, she couldn't breathe, and here I am breathing now. And in this breathing, I felt connected to her. I felt her saying to me, yes, breathe, girl, go ahead, breathe, yes, breathe. And now I'm in conversation with her. You can think of that as a spiritual conversation, or just in memory, like, yeah, now I'm breathing for her, I'm breathing for me, I'm breathing for all my people, I'm breathing, it really became this huge cathartic experience. And this is such a great example, because while this breath work started as, just me trying to move, I felt stuck. I felt a lot of heaviness and stagnant energy in my body. So my first thought always, okay, just start moving. Just move anyway. And I did this breath work as one way to move it. And so I connected with my mother. But here's this other thing that happened, and also in that process was, now I'm breathing, and I felt not just I'm breathing for myself, my mother, but like I'm breathing for all my people. And here's where, through the process of looking at my grief, that I kind of fell into other aspects of grief that I hadn't even thought about, but this sort of racialized trauma, this disconnection, these daily hits that I was taking as a Black woman, and just doing what we do. Okay, well, that happened, and we keep going. We keep going. Black women are not the only people who do this. All of us do this in some form or fashion, but certainly people who are targets of oppression in this culture are taking many, many daily hits just to exist in this culture. And so it turns out, and this is how I talk about it now on my Patreon community, is that grief, if you look to move it through your body, doing breath work or body work or yoga or taking a hike or running or any kind of physical activity, if you can use that physicality to start to access your grief and move it through, it will necessarily open up other parts in your body where other hard stuff is stored, stuff you haven't wanted to look at because it was just too hard and too painful. Well, it's still there in the body, and you can access it as you're moving through. And see, this is what when I'm doing a workshop, like I do a workshop called the Living Funeral Ceremony, and where we take people through a simulated experience of dying and then coming back to life. And that's a big emotional experience. And I always tell people at the beginning, before that starts, don't get stuck. Big emotions will come through. Don't let yourself get stuck there. Just let them keep moving through. And this is why moving the body is such a great way to access grief, metabolize it. You don't have to go through a big emotional, intellectual processing about your grief. You can. That's certainly a useful thing to do. But what is also useful is to simply move and be in the experience of, oh yeah, this is my grief here in my chest. So now I'm just breathing. I'm being with it. I'm allowing that grief that's stuck in my lungs, in my breath. I'm moving it, and it's informing me. And what I'm learning in this process is, wow, there are so many ways that I don't show up fully. There's so many ways I don't take a full deep breath. There's so many ways I don't fully occupy my body, that I'm holding my breath, just trying to make it through. Now I have access to more ways of being that I didn't know before, and I got there by creating space for my grief.
Wow. That's really powerful. And I so resonate with it. I mean, unknowingly to me, but ways in which I may have processed grief in a physical way, but without even realizing that's what I was doing, why I felt motivated. Like I have to go for a walk right now. I have to do yoga. I have to move my body. But at the time, I didn't recognize that was my grief that was maybe pushing me in that direction.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because we so often, especially women, especially people in Black and Brown, Indigenous bodies, my Asian sibs, we get so trained to override those urges. See, this is the thing about reconnecting to your body, which is also very useful, is that your body already knows how to heal itself. Mm-hmm. You can do all the research, you can read all the books, go to all the classes, and, do all the therapies. Those are all really, you should do all those things. I'm not even disparaging any of them. But also what is true is your body already knows. And really all there is to do is just like being a death doula, or being holding space, a vigil space, is just got to be present. Just be present. So that's, again, another reason why I feel like the body is just another opportunity to just notice, just allow what's coming up. And if you pay even the slightest bit of attention to it, you might get really interested and pay more attention to it. But okay, pay the slightest bit of attention and just be with it and do what it feels like the next most useful thing to do, or the next thing that feels like, you know what, if I just did this, this would feel really good. And I know, Karen, you've done the research, you've been reading my Medium, so you know that I talk about how, it's sort of like a pleasure perspective to looking at grief and life and death. And pleasure meaning only that you're looking to see what feels good. And so it's just another way of saying what would feel really good to me right now. So like you had this idea that, oh my God, I've just got to get out and go for a walk because that would feel good. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't usually say it that way in our heads because we have a lot of training around, no, we don't do things that feel good. We feel things that are useful. We do things that are useful.
Yes.
Forget about that feeling good stuff. We don't do that because we're good, Christians or members of the society. And that's all very suspicious, anything that feels good. But okay. So, but the truth is that you're doing something that you feel like, if I took a walk, that would actually be useful. That would feel good. So these are ways to, all of this attention paid to your body, to your senses, to urges, to do the next thing. All of that is your body's way of informing you of what would be a healing step.
And as you said, it really, all we have to do is be present and just listen to what our body's trying to tell us.
Yeah. Turn off the TV, put down your phone, turn off your computer, go sit outside. And if it's not safe to sit outside, just sit. Just find a quiet place to sit. And you don't have to do it very long. You could just do it for a minute. Just do it for a minute. And you might be surprised. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you did that for a minute and you were suddenly overwhelmed. Okay, that's not unusual. And that's not bad. That is useful information. Because I hear this a lot, people, they don't want to grieve, or they only want to do it in a certain place among people where it feels safe because they don't want to get overwhelmed, and then they'll not know what to do with themselves. And so I just want to counteract that messaging, because, that again is our culture's way of keeping us yoked to somebody else knows better than me. And certainly, if you're not a white cisgendered man, you get that programming in spades. Mm-hmm. I mean, men get it too. We all get it. But, this idea that somebody else, a professional, an expert, knows better than me, you can just put that aside. Just put it aside for the minute or so that you're just going to be still and notice and just trust yourself that nothing's going to happen that you can't handle. Because if you couldn't handle it, it wouldn't be happening. So the fact that it's happening, you can handle it. And how you're going to handle it is you're just going to breathe. You're just going to breathe and take the next breath and maybe you could put your hands on your body. Just keep breathing. Settle. Now, I know there are people who have panic attacks, and so that's a very different space. And I don't even want to presume that simply breathing is going to handle a panic attack. I'm not a professional psychologist. If you know you're that kind of person that has panic attacks, then take what I'm saying with a grain of salt and continue to do what you know how to do to move through big emotions. And I just want to say that, again, I guess that's actually the bottom line, is the capacity to move through big emotions is our capacity to grow. It's how you're going to grow. It's how you're going to become a full human being, by facing those big emotions, because they're there for a reason. They're your body's, your life's response to a lived experience. So before you die, why not just live? Like live it all, like have it all.
Yeah. And don't you really feel that right now, every single one of us needs to do some of this work because of this year of COVID that we've been through? Even those of us who haven't had someone we know die of COVID, there have just been so many losses and so much pain in our society in this last year. And I wonder if in some ways we aren't just one massive ball of stuck grief in our society. And because I just heard on a podcast a few days ago, a speaker said, if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it to other people. And sometimes when I look around and I see people are behaving badly out there in social media, even in public places toward one another. And I think, oh my gosh, maybe it's because they're not transforming their pain. They're spewing it out onto other people. And all of us need to stop right where we are and just acknowledge we've all had a tremendous amount of pain to deal with, and it's okay for us to do a little work on ourselves to move that energy through.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that, yes, we can all do that for ourselves, but we can all do that for each other too. I think what you just said is true. And I think you and I have had in our earlier conversation, I said this, if you're not grieving something right now, I have to wonder if you've been alive this past year. There's loss everywhere. And whether or not you have chosen to actively acknowledge it, and be with it, you have experienced those losses. And so I think it's good. I think it's useful to treat your fellow human beings as if, because it is true, this is a person who is grieving. So we can have compassion for one another to whatever extent is possible and makes sense in any given situation. Like, for instance, I got to say, on some level, I can, of course, feel compassion for people who are in white bodies right now, because not only are they grieving the losses that everyone's grieving around the coronavirus and loss of work and loss of homes, and friends and social connections, all of that's true. But there's also, on some psychic level, this experience of loss around the world as you knew it in terms of your place in it as a person of European descent, because that's being challenged right now in a way that it hasn't been challenged before. So while people of color have been bearing the brunt of that conversation, and we are grieving all the things that we have grieving currently in this current environment, with so many people of color dying of coronavirus disproportionately, but we're also in all the other ways that coronavirus has disproportionately impacted our communities. But we're also have this historic trauma that we're also still, it's been passed down to us and is in our bodies, if you in terms of epigenetics, and so we're metabolizing that, we're dealing with that, we're living that, and so these are all things that, you hear this in the conversation now around in this racial, I don't even like to use the word racial, but as we're starting to figure out how we are going to be living together in this world, people of color are coming to terms with that in their bodies. But also I feel like people of European descent, people who have white bodies or white passing, also could be actually using their tools around grief to actually grieve. I mean, truly grieve what it means to be a person who is the beneficiary of a system that harms people in other bodies, Black, brown, indigenous, Asian. I mean, everybody's seeing that now. We're watching that, and that has got to be traumatizing. It should be traumatizing. But what it's going to be useful going forward, actually, is for people in white bodies to feel what it means. And then the feeling what it means to grieve, to honest to God, grieve. You've got to be grieving right now. And if you're not, again, it's like you've missed it. You've missed this whole moment. I feel like this whole moment in history is an opportunity for everyone to grab hold of whatever grief tools, support systems, theories, body-based practices to metabolize the grief, both current and historical, enough that we could actually get to being human with each other. That's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And I think when each one of us is able to look back at our own lineage and our own ancestry, we know that there's grief. We know that we've inherited grief from the past and from our ancestors and from their pain that they carried. And no matter the color of our skin, we know that all of us are carrying vast amounts of grief. And it really seems like this is the time when we're being given the opportunity to deal with all of that grief.
You know, there's so much permission right now. There's more permission right now than there ever has been before. And who knows how long it's going to last, but this is your window. And the opportunity is there. You could do it. You could just lean in. Just lean in. And as you and I have been talking about, where do you start? Well, you start with your body. Just feel, be quiet, sit. I rock. In fact, thank you for reminding me. I'm rocking right now. All of this are ways that it has your body feel good, has your body feel safe, and it gives you the space to actually access some of the hard stuff. And you don't have to do it alone. Get a buddy. Join a group. And it's actually more effective to do it that way. But you don't have to wait for that. You can start right now. Right now. Just put your hands on your body and just rock. Just feel, notice what you feel. You might not feel anything. That's okay. Just keep rocking. Just keep noticing and breathe. You can just notice the quality of your breath. And then, this way in to accessing your body, because if you're going to access your body, you're for sure going to access your parents, your family, your ancestors, and everything you just said, all that grief that's been passed down to you. Yeah.
You just brought to my mind this dream that I had several years ago, that in the dream somehow I was facing my parents and offering them forgiveness for anything that happened, in our lives together. And as I looked up, behind my parents were standing their parents, and behind them were standing all of their parents. And suddenly I realized it went on endlessly. And I saw this like, wow, like forgiveness, my forgiveness has to extend back, all the way back through all generations, because all of us are carrying this pain that's been handed down one generation to another. And anyway, that showed me, for one, how deep the pain is and how much forgiveness is required. And I guess grieving it is part of that process of coming to forgiveness too.
Girl, you're giving me chills. Yes. 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 All of that. It does go way back. And exactly what you said, before you can, I think, adequately forgive, and we can all do the perfunctory or performative way of forgiving people, but we all know what that feels like in our bodies. That's like, okay, I just said the words, like you were done, like you were made to do in school, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're gonna really forgive somebody, you're gonna have to really grieve. You're gonna have to really feel, what was the tort? What was the hurt? What are you actually forgiving? What is that thing? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What's the weight of it, the texture of it? You're going to have to really spend a little time. And the forgiveness that comes from that place is a forgiveness that is healing for you, in your body. I like to say forgiveness is actually not so much for the other person. Mm-hmm. That forgiveness is for you. That is a letting go of so much energy that you can now use for your own life's journey. You're free. When you forgive someone, you are free. You have let go. But you cannot get there until you go there.
Ooh, so true, because in that dream, it was clear to me, looking back at all of these ancestors through time, it felt like that is a massive weight. If I'm going to carry all the pain from all these generations, that's a lot. That's going to weigh me down. That's going to take a lot of my energy. And that forgiveness felt so freeing, to just say, I don't have to carry that. I don't have to be angry, and I can offer forgiveness and free myself from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. And then once again, that statement that I heard, that if you don't transform that pain, grieving and forgiving, are part of the process, then you're likely to just transmit it to someone else, either to hand it on to your next generation, your offspring, or your neighbors, or other people around you. And that's why it's so essential that we all do this work right now.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you're saying that, because there's two levels, right? There's a level of what you haven't healed or looked at or metabolized. You're just kind of spewing out in the world and all of your interactions. That's real. That's happening. But there is also this way that you are now passing on through your lineage, your genetic material. You're passing that on to the next generation. And if we're talking about, we want the world to be a better place for our children, and honestly, whether you have children or not, you have family members. You have there are people related to you genetically who are part of your lineage, who might be a niece or a nephew or some other, and then you can even move on from there to people who look up to you, just not even genetically connected to you in terms of DNA, but they look up to you. So you as a person, you're to locate yourself in your constellation. That's a useful grown-up thing to do, actually. Just notice who you're impacting. And you can think about it like, I like the way Adrienne Marie Brown talks about, fractals. If you do your piece can impact other pieces that you can't even see. It's like a ripple. So just your mere taking, like we said earlier, just a minute to look and see and feel and maybe cry, maybe laugh. Laughter, by the way, is a really good way to metabolize grief. I've used that one very, very often. It doesn't have to be all hard. Joy, laughter are very effective ways to metabolize loss, grief, the hard stuff.
Oh, that's a good reminder. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Well, would you tell us a little bit about this journey that you've been on more recently that I know people can learn about through your Patreon page, but just tell us about what it is that you're doing and how people can interact with you.
Yeah. I at the beginning of the year, I kind of started taking everything I'd been through in 2020 and then just sort of really started to focus in on this idea that what we've been talking about in this conversation about how grief done well or done at all can be a portal to also access racialized trauma, which we all have. I don't care who you are, you have it. If you're alive, you've been conditioned to be an adult, brought up to be an adult in this country, you have racialized trauma. So grief being a way into that conversation, an opportunity to work that material, metabolize the intergenerational pain and suffering from existing in this country so that you can have more freedom, more space, become an evolved being in this conversation, in this moment in history that we're in right now, where we're that normal, that old normal, that's gone. I'm sorry, it's not coming back. It's over. What we have now is a new moment in history, and there'll be some aspects, that will come into play from before. But it's really an opportunity to be creative and to really take huge strides forward in how we're evolving as a species. So that is what I'm looking at in the Patreon, is how to use an embodied grief practice to access also this epigenetic trauma that has been passed down so that we can become more fluid, more resilient citizens of the planet, both in terms of interacting with each other, but also interacting with the environment. All beings on the planet, that level of generosity and maturity that's available once you've let go of so much of the pain and the trauma. You're not going to let go of all of it. I mean, come on. This is not even just your lifetime's worth of trauma, as we just said. This is stuff that's been passed on. So you will get as far as you get, and it will be huge. It'll just be huge. So that's what we're looking at in the Patreon, is all those ways that we can use the tools of grief, embodied grieving, to get to that material.
And so people can kind of go on that journey with you, it sounds like, through your Patreon page by signing up to be a supporter, and then can get access to the materials you're creating there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm posting a lot of stuff from the teachers and the thought leaders that I'm reading that's informing me. I'm posting that material there, and then I'm posting my reactions to them. And it's intended to be a conversation, actually. I don't intend it to be this one-way thing where I'm just doing this and you get to look at it. I'm actually hoping that people will respond like, really? Do you think that's true? Or, yeah, I noticed this happens for me when that particular thing comes up, or I use this tool, anyhow. Yes, please come and join and participate. It's an interactive, intended to be interactive.
And so people can find your Patreon page through your website, right? OceanaEndOfLifeDoula.com.
Yes.
And I will leave a link to that on the show notes for this episode. And I can leave a link directly to the Patreon page also, because I think once people go there and read about it, they'll understand what's happening and how to participate and be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have something coming up, end of life vision mapping. And so I wanted to ask you to just tell us a little bit about that.
I am doing this course almost like it's a little bit of a break from the deep introspection, of looking at grief and historical trauma. It's just a little different take, but it's the end of life vision map is this really cool, almost whimsical process of advanced care planning. Although I'm asking people to have already done a few things around advanced care planning, like, have your advanced care directives or living will sort of already done, at least before you start. And then I offer people a tool, a really detailed tool by Jennifer O'Brien and Alua Arthur, to look at their estate planning and all the documents and checklist of things you need to have in place before you depart the planet. So there's that logistical piece right up front. But then we spend 6 weeks looking at, how do you want your end of life to go? How do you want it to look? With the assumption that you only have 3 months to live. So we really bring it right front and center with that amount of urgency. Because this is often the case, if someone has the luxury of getting a diagnosis, you often, you've got 6 months to live, it's sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less. But, you can just pursue your life as if you've only got 3 months to live. And then what would you need to have in place so that the end of your days happen in a way that feels good to you, that is right for you, that honors you and your time here. And you're going to look at it in 5 different areas, sorry. Physically, how do you want your physical space set up? Mentally, what are the intellectual property, if you will? What are the legacy that you want to leave behind? So getting that organized and set up. Emotionally, who do you want to have around you? What kind of relationships? How do you want to wind up the relationships that you have? Who do you want to make sure you say goodbye to? All of that. And then spiritually, like, what are your beliefs around end of life? And what kinds of spiritual pieces do you want to have in place as you go through the end of your day, so you transition out of this life into whatever you believe is the next step after this life? So how do you set that up so that you that actually is happening in the way you want it to happen. And then practically, the fifth domain being, how do you want your body disposed of when after you are no longer living in it? Do you want to have a home funeral? Do you want to have just a traditional funeral with the mortuary and embalming and all that? Do you want to be a natural burial? There's so many options right now for how to dispose of a body. It's an interesting time. It's really cool. And I live in Washington. I'm so lucky because now I get to have my body composted.
Yes,
Recompose, Katrina Spade. Woohoo! That's my option. So yeah, we're going to look at your last days in those 5 domains over the course of 6 weeks. And what's really cool about this opportunity, which starts the week of the 17th, but you can jump in after the first week because all the sessions will be recorded. So you can watch the first session and just jump right in. And but what's really cool is that there's going to be a group of people. Usually I do this with people one-on-one, but doing it with a group means there's a lot more cool ideas. Ooh, you can steal with pride. And there's support. There's people around there's a group of people to hold you in the really tough spots. And I have seen it. Believe me, people enter this process and they think, oh, I'm a death doula, or I'm already in a death trade, or I already have had someone die. I know how this goes. They always think this. And then inevitably somebody hits a spot they did not expect that really gets them. That this takes their breath away. Like, oh, I didn't really expect to confront how I don't really have solid spiritual beliefs about the end of life. I might want to explore this more. As an example, that was certainly the case for me. I was really shocked thinking I had this solid spiritual practice and then realizing that my solid spiritual practice didn't really hold a lot of information about death and dying. And I needed to do more research. So stuff like that.
Wow, that sounds excellent. And I'll mention this interview will be airing on May 17th, which is the day your class starts. But as you said, if someone's just hearing about it right now, you can still sign up and get into the course, and you can make up whatever you might have missed on the first day.
Right. Oh, and bonus, if you join the Patreon, you get a discount.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So good way to get involved in both of those things that you have going on.
Right.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds really wonderful and so valuable, so important. And I can tell you from my hospice work and being with so many people who were trying to do all of this work that you're talking about, that you're helping people with, trying to do that in their last few days of life when time is running short. And so to do it in advance and to have the peace of mind, knowing that you've thought through these things and worked through it in advance, that's so comforting.
Oh, it's so key. It seems like in every one of these things, someone starts out by saying, oh, one of my fears is that if I start thinking about the end of my life, it'll bring my end of life sooner. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, that's not how it works.
Yeah, isn't it funny that we have such superstitions around it?
Right? But then I tell them, I said, look, you can wait. Don't do anything. Just wait until you're going to die. I guarantee you will not have enough time
true.
Do the stuff that you could have already thought through and done really well. You won't have that time because you're in doctor's appointments, your energy's going, mm-hmm. People just run out of time. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, it's very true.
And, once you have a plan, you can always update it. It doesn't, just because you created it, you're 22 years old. This is not cast in stone. In fact, I recommend that people look at their whatever they've created every year. Update it, Also, too, what I've noticed is people going through this process is that they come across things that wow, I could be doing this right now. If I, for instance, one client, when she got to the emotional domain, what she noticed was that she wanted her brother to be at her bedside when she was dying. But she hadn't talked to her brother in like 10 years. They had a falling out. And man, it would be so much better if that got reconciled before she was like dying.
Yes.
So she ended up calling him and they got back together. They're
wow.
They're relating again. It's all very happy and they're in each other's lives just because she looked at the end of her days.
Wow. There's that grief work and forgiveness work happening in real time and making a difference.
Oh, God, Karen, you're good. Yes. Pull that together. Very nice.
Well, oh gosh, Oceana, it's such a delight to talk to you. I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with me. And actually, I can't wait to talk to you again the next time, because I'm sure we'll find another time when we can talk again.
Oh, yes, please.
Well, best wishes to you with your projects, and keep bringing all this good wisdom into the world.
I enjoyed this enormously, Karen. Thank you so much for creating this space, for all the conversations that we had, and just really touched my heart. Thank you.
Yes, same here. Well, take care, Oceana.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Oceana. And I just wanted to remind you that one of the most powerful parts of this interview for me, was the two of us talking about the idea that if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it. And that's why it's so essential right now in our society that each one of us work on our own grief, and to be open to all of the ways in which we're grieving, not just our current circumstances today, but our ancestral grief we've inherited through our ancestors and our lineage and our heritage and our culture, all of the grief that is impacting us. And that we not just work on that grief intellectually in our heads by thinking about it and processing it, but that we actually feel the grief physically in our bodies. We know for sure that grief gets stored in the body, and I've had so many body workers and massage therapists tell me this, that often when they're doing deep muscle tissue work on a client, that person will burst into tears and cry throughout the massage. And part of that is releasing some of the stored grief and pain that's being held in the body. So I just don't think we can emphasize that enough right now. It is really important for all of us to do the work we need to do to deal with our own grief before we try to go out there and understand what's happening perhaps in the rest of our society, or before we point a finger of blame at anyone else, that we each first look within and be in the process at least of transforming our own pain to make sure we don't end up transmitting it to someone else in the form of blame or anger. So I think that's just a great caveat for us right now, as we're still within the pandemic, but we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Things are beginning to open up, and this is an important time when we can take a moment and step back and breathe and just think about all of the things that have happened, that we've experienced and witnessed in this past year. Create your own little grief ritual, maybe a little dance that you do every day. I don't know. That's something I'm working on, the dance idea. I really like that. And laughter also. So I wish you all the best on your journey as you're looking at your own grief and figuring out where to go next, and how we come out of this time of pandemic and bring with us some lessons learned, some new ways of looking at the world, new ways of seeing ourselves, and hopefully a little bit of higher consciousness as well. If you happen to enjoy content like this that I'm sharing with you, be sure to tell other people about End of Life University and share episodes with people that you think might benefit from them. You can also help the podcast by subscribing wherever you happen to be listening, whether it's on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. If you subscribe and then also leave a rating and a review, that increases the ranking of the podcast and makes sure that people searching for content like this are able to find it. And I'm really trying to grow our community here of people willing to talk about some of these challenging issues like death and dying and grief. And so be sure to bring in anyone to our community that you think would love to be part of it or benefit from it. So be sure to tune in next week for the 300th episode. And until then, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever happens next, and love each and every moment of this precious life. Bye-bye.